Well, in 2014, we've had our second season of archaeological excavation at Spike Island. Our excavation is a collaboration between University College Cork, the Institute for Field Research, which is based in Los Angeles, and Cork County Council, who actually administer the site on Spike Island, which is in Cork Harbour. We had our largest group to date. We had the largest numbers we had were about 40 people. About half of those were my own students from UCC, and the other half came mostly, well, from North America, from Canada and the USA, through the Institute for Field Research. So we had a very large team, and that enabled us to excavate in a number of different areas. So we did a lot of excavation in the punishment block, which we had started in 2013. There was a certain amount of urgency to work in the punishment block because that building is going to be renovated hopefully next year. So we needed to remove archaeological deposits within that building. Also within the fort, we excavated in the parade ground. That was a very exciting excavation. And then we did two excavations outside the fort. One in the cemetery that we had worked in last year, and we had pretty much ascertained in 2013 that that cemetery did not contain the full 1,200 convicts who died during the 36 years of the Victorian prison on Spike Island, which is the focus of our excavation. So we also excavated this year on the eastern side of the island, which is where we're pretty sure that another cemetery is located there. We didn't find that cemetery in 2014, so that's our challenge for 2015 and the years ahead. On most archaeological projects, we have a certain hierarchy in terms of staff and students. I'm the director of the project. So I oversee and organize the planning and management of the entire project. Then we have a number of supervisors. Most of our supervisors this year are my PhD students. And then we have a number of undergraduate and postgraduate students with varying amounts of archaeological experience. Some have never been on an archaeological site before. Others have quite a bit of experience. And basically the supervisors are in charge of a particular trench or cutting, and they run that portion of the excavation. Spike Island Archaeological Project is focused on the Victorian prison, convict prison that operated on Spike Island in the mid to late 19th century. Like any part of the Irish landscape, Spike Island has multiple stories to tell from all different time periods. And our interest is in the mid to late 19th century story of the island. In the early 19th century, the face of the island, the surface, the topography of the island was radically transformed when a large fortress was built. The construction of that started in 1804. It wasn't the first fortress built on the site. There had been some gun batteries built there in the late 1700s. But this large fort was, the construction of that started in 1804, and that was at the height of the wars between the English and the French around the time under the Emperor Napoleon. Now, Napoleon was defeated in 1815, and a couple of years after that, the construction of the fort was halted by the British government. This would have been a huge drain on their finances, and a small garrison was kept, just probably 100 men or so, was kept in the fort from about 1820. Then in 1847, at the height of the Great Famine in Ireland, the government needed a spillover prison because the prisons were full to bursting point, mostly with people who were in prison for stealing relatively trivial things and small amounts and so on. So Spike was used as a convict depot from that period, from 1847 to 1883. And it had a kind of a dual purpose for the government in the sense that the ethos of prisons in the mid-19th century was that prisoners should work. The aim of the prison was to reform the prisoner And this reformation of the prisoner was achieved through work and isolation and observation. So Spike Island became a public works depot, and the principal objective of the government in terms of putting this public works depot on the island was to A, finish the fort, and B, to have the convicts also construct the naval dockyards at Haulbowline, which is an island just a couple of hundred yards to the northwest of Spike Island. We know historically what portions of the island and also neighbouring Haulbowline and other locations in Cork Harbour that were built by convict labour, because the prison service had produced annual reports, and from those they each of those reports enumerated the work that was carried out by the convict prisoners in that particular year. So we know, for example, we know how much of the fortifications at Spike Island had been completed by 1820, when the construction project was temporarily halted, and then we know also which portions of the fort were completed after 1847, when convict labour was used. This year in 2014, we had two different groups of my own UCC students. We had undergraduates who would be from our second and third year, and then we also had my 5 master's students. I run a master's program in human osteoarchaeology, and the focus of that program is the data about the past that can be gleaned through the analyses of human skeletal remains. I teach two feed-in courses to that at second and third year level, which acquaints archaeology students with what the types of analyses that are carried out on archaeological human remains, human skeletal remains. So all of our UCC students, whether they're at master's level or undergraduate level, would have taken those courses, and all of those students are anxious to excavate in the cemetery areas, where they get to use the skills that they've learned in terms of just excavating human skeletons and also identifying and analysing the human remains once they come into the laboratory as well. We also have students who come to us from this year in 2014, mostly from the USA and Canada. They come to us through the Institute for Field Research, which is a not-for-profit organisation that enrolls students for archaeological field schools all over the world. And these students come to us from a variety of backgrounds, not necessarily majoring in archaeology, but with an interest in the past. Some have field experience, some do not, which pretty much mirrors our own undergraduates as well. Many of those do not have actual field experience. This is their first taste of that. So all of these students come together, and we live and work on the island. And the students are rotated through, over the 4 or 5 weeks of the excavation, they're rotated through the different trenches or areas of work. So they get to work in, say, the graveyard area, but also get to work within the parade ground and in the punishment block. So they get to experience different aspects of the archaeological work that's carried out on the island. When you're working in the historic period, there can be a disconnect between, the historical record is the perspective of usually the people in charge, and it's very interesting to see if their instructions are actually carried out on the ground. And that's one of the general themes that we want to explore in this prison, and that is if the written record, which reflects the opinions, if you like, of those running the institution, if that reflects the realities that we find on the ground and under the ground. So in the parade ground this year, we were able to uncover the foundations of this very substantial wooden stockade that had to be, the foundations had to be dug into the bedrock, carved out of the bedrock. So there are other areas within the parade ground where we would like to explore. Not far from where we were working this year, there was a temporary building put up in the late 1840s called the Wooden Prison. And this was a building that was originally destined for the prison, the government public works depot that the British were operating in Bermuda at the same time. And that was diverted to Spike Island. So we would like to look at the foundations of the wooden prison and see if we can find evidence of prisoner activity within that building. A more long-term goal would be to look at a third prison building called the Iron Prison, which sounds like a very intimidating and fierce place. But this was a building that was constructed in the early 1850s using a new technology at that time, and that new technology was corrugated iron. So it was not a material that's particularly useful for making living accommodation, but it was used to construct a cell accommodation for the prisoners. Now we have the original plans of that, and it was supposed to be a T-shaped two-story building. We're not sure, looking at later maps, that doesn't seem to have been what was constructed. So we would like to explore the foundations of that building too. The other big question, I suppose, for 2015 and future years is that in the walled cemetery where we've excavated quite a few, 12 prisoner graves at this stage, we have more or less established that there are probably about 200, 250 burials in that area. It seems to accommodate the prisoners who died post 1860. So it's really representing the last 23 years of the prison's operation. Now, we know historically that the period of high mortality was, say, from about 1850 to 1854. This is when we lost about 80% of the 1,200 prisoners who died during the operation of the Victorian prison. And they do not seem to be buried within that walled area. Now, we tested in 2013 to see if they could have been buried to the west of that walled area. That doesn't seem to be the case. There is a reference in an 1849 document to a pre-existing cemetery on the eastern side of the island. And we also have a memoir written by a Presbyterian chaplain who worked on Spike Island in the 1850s, where he talks about he talks about a graveyard, which his references to it are not terribly precise, but you could interpret his references as suggesting that it was the graveyard on the east side of the island. And he mentions how this is going to be covered by the fortifications, by the glacis that was being completed by convict labour. So we we did some test trenching in 2014 looking for that cemetery. We didn't find it. We did find evidence of convict activity in the form of a cobbled surface that may have been a temporary roadway used in the construction of the fortifications. So we will investigate that further in future years, because it would be very interesting to find this graveyard from the period of high mortality and compare that maybe with the types of the regimented coffined burials that we're finding in this later, the graves that I think are post 1860. When you had a prisoner dying, say, one a month, that's a very different scenario to one dying every day or every other day. And the prison authorities may have dealt with those different scenarios of mortality in very different ways. And that's something that we would really like to explore.